Welcome to the Grand Collaborations, a part of the Grand Podcast. My name is Niels Winter, and I'm the creator, editor, and host of The Grand. The Grand is now open for business, and I have therefore created the podcast category The Grand Collaboration, where I will launch podcast collaborations with partners. This podcast episode is a collaboration between the RM Framework project funded by Horizon Europe and The Grand. Research management is a job title that keeps getting more and more solid ground under its feet. From a role with little or no recognition to now being acknowledged by most countries in the EU as a vital role in research organizations. One of the reasons why the research management role has reached this point is because of a dedicated community around Europe that has insisted on shaping the role and demanding that it is taken seriously in the research community. Part of this big job has been done through EU-funded projects that have given the community the opportunity to define, shape, build and connect through the projects like Formation and RM Roadmap. The RM Framework project is the next step in strengthening the role of research managers in Europe. With EU funding, a consortium is now developing a European qualification system for research management. The goal is to standardize education and training programs and create a quality label that makes skills more comparable across countries, ultimately helping to professionalize and improve research management within the European research area. The Grand and RM Framework will over 15 podcast episodes dig into the different parts of the project and follow the development over the next 1 year and a half. Here in this fourth episode, it is finally time to dig into the handbook for research management trainers that will be one of the key outcomes of the project. I am joined by project partners Frank Ziegele and Niklas Rauterberg from CHE Higher Education Management and Policy to outline the details of how this important tool will be shaped and how research management trainers will be able to use it when it will be ready. Great content. Please enjoy. Welcome to the Grand, the EU funding podcast. This is the fourth episode in the RM Framework series that I'm doing in collaboration with the RM Framework EU project, Horizon Europe project. We've been looking forward to this episode for a while now because we've been circling around this subject in the first 3 episodes that we have done in this series. It's the handbook. I'm going to talk about the handbook on training for research managers. And with me today to unfold what that is and the background for it, I have Frank and Niklas. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Niels. Good to be back here.
Yeah. It was a nice episode we did on the ecosystem together with Henning. As it is with this series, just to explain the discourse of the frame, is that I will help the project produce some audible content to get a reach and to get some more meat on the bone, what the RM Framework project, what you're doing, the results, and we will also later dig into the pilots that you will do in the project, so to get in-depth content about what the project is about. First, Frank, 2 words about yourself.
2 words about myself, yes. So hello, Niels. So my name is Frank Ziegele. I'm the executive director of CHE, Center for Higher Education, which is a think tank for higher education from Germany. And I'm also a professor for higher education management at the University of Applied Sciences in Osnabrück. And I'm part of this RM Framework project.
Thanks. Niklas?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Niklas Rauterberg, and I also work for the CHE with Frank on this RM Framework project. And my main task in the project is to work on this research management handbook, so to speak, for training providers. I've been working with Frank in several projects before, also at the University of Applied Science in Osnabrück. So nice to be here.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's a nice bridge to the fly in the handbook. So What is it?
So, a short fly-in of the handbook. So what we are trying to do is to create a handbook for training providers to, so to speak, make it easier to develop research management trainings. I think that's one goal. And the other goal is that we also want to achieve to make trainings across Europe in regards to research management easier comparable with one another. So that's, I would say, the main objectives we have.
So let's just move straight into. Thanks for the nice short fly-in, Niklas. Often these fly-ins they get much longer than I expect them to be. So first block we have here in the content side. So why do we need the handbook, Frank?
Yes, why do we need a handbook? So first of all, I think if we are on a very abstract level, I have to mention the purpose of this whole project as a whole. And the handbook, of course, will contribute to that purpose. And that is contributing to the professional identity and competence development of research managers across Europe. So that sounds very abstract, but the handbook delivers some very specific things in that context. So Niklas was already mentioning in the fly-in that this is something we create for research management training providers. Yeah, so this is really the target group that we have in our focus. It's not research managers themselves, so it's those people who develop and invent programs how to create this professional identity and professional competences. And the second goal related to that is we really want to create a European system of shared reference points, stackability, interoperability. You could put all kinds of words behind it, maybe making it specific, but by saying, well, we want to create a system where a research manager could take a module in a country one in a national context on research management, somehow gets this module certified, and could take another module on the European level in an international program, and then put all that together to a specific qualification. And this is what is not really possible at the moment. Yeah, because we have a lot of trainings around Europe for research managers, but this whole system is fragmented and it's not interoperable. And we want to create standards, a framework, a setting in which that works. And the last and then also to provide this idea of what I called stackability. Yeah, you can put one competence on top of the other to build your profile. And the third thing is we really want to put the concept of competences into the center. Yeah, because if we think about, I think many people will know that if you think about the traditional way how you develop a training program. Yeah, so you are somewhere, you say, I want to create something for my research managers. They have to be trained. And then you look for a good trainer. You ask the trainer, hey, trainer, what can you do? And then the trainer says, this is what I can provide. And then you put 3 trainers together and develop something out of it. But you do not really think about what is the competence that we want to provide for those going to the training. So the competence should really be, so to say, the currency that people are using to conceptualize trainings, like I said, to make trainings comparable and stackable. So we will. I think we will tell you more details about that, how we do it. But it's really about overcoming traditional ways of having a more supply-oriented approach towards developing a program to a real demand-oriented approach. Because you ask, what is the competence that a certain person in a certain job needs or in a certain area needs? And then we see how we can conceptualize a training program to provide these competences. So it's really a kind of shift in mindset, which is very familiar in the European context, because this is the basic principle also of the Bologna system. Yeah, that we are of course all familiar with, but that should also refer to these research management trainings.
Yeah, and in its sense, it's a matter of streamlining the area of research management. It's the trainings of research management. That is what, in a sense, is the educational capacity and qualification of the people that need to sit and do this. So it's actually a quite important area, because it's the basis of not just eclectic, that you get your capacities learning by doing somehow in a research institute somewhere, and in another research institute it's other things they acquire by learning by doing, or having a course here and there on budgeting or how to approach funding or so. You know, it's a matter of getting solid ground under this profession.
It's a matter of creating a profession. Yeah, because this is one of the features where we can talk about a profession, because if there are real qualification paths that allow you to qualify for that profession, and like you say, you do not just, of course, you still learn things on the job, and we should also be a bit careful with streamlining, because we don't want identical things across Europe, but we want a common ground. Yeah, of course, we still want diversity of programs, and we also need national specialties, but we need a common ground.
Niklas, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to get into a little bit, because I think we've seen this at the Bologna process, how difficult it is to streamline something across all of Europe. And even today, it's still a difficult task. So we know it's hard. And we still try with the handbook to find this common ground, but at the same time, we want to make it in a way interoperable, that we don't say this is what everybody has to do, but more like Frank said, it's a baseline. And if we can agree on a baseline, maybe we get to where people can still individualize their programs for their specific needs in the institution or in their country, and then still have something that is a common ground. And talking about these competences, they're also often tied to learning outcomes. And when we developed the EU Erasmus course, that was a project Frank and I worked on before, we realized that the participants, they were not interested in getting ECTS from our program. Most of them were more interested in receiving a certificate where the learning outcomes and competences are listed, so that they can go to their future employer and say, look, I now can do this. And that's what we realized when we were working on this other project, that these competences and learning outcomes, that's what people are really interested in.
Yeah, it's that indeed. And then, of course, as we also have here in the rundown now, it's also to give, so the vocational training schools or whatever providers you would have of trainings, give them a frame of how to design the programs.
Yeah, it's not only for universities or so. Yeah, so it is really for any kind of private, public, whatever provider. It's also applicable to in-house trainings within institutions. Yeah, so in the end, everyone who develops a structured program on training research managers should be able to use it.
Let's just move into the purpose and the structure section. Purpose, overview of the handbook, the concept and the main components.
Yeah. So I will talk a little bit about what the handbook will contain, so to speak.
Yep.
So at the moment, first of all, we have to make clear that we are still not absolutely sure how we will deliver it in the end to the end user, because we realize that we have to put a lot of different chapters in there, and probably in the end it will be a document with a lot of pages. And as we know from past experience, probably nobody will read a document with 300 plus pages. So So
I'm shocked.
we very early we discussed how we can do it in a way that we have chapters that we will have these one handbook where everything is in, but also how can we do it in a way that there's chapters and tools that are existing for themselves, so that you don't have to read the whole handbook to use parts of the handbook for your specific purpose. So that's something we want to emphasize and that we want to build the handbook on. Because, for example, what was talked, I think, in the last podcast or in one of the last episodes, the coherent frame that Anna and Henning developed, this will be part of the handbook as well. But probably we will also have this as a separate document in the end. Mm-hmm. So, but there will be a part where we introduce the content of the handbook, how to use it, and then we will also have a little part about the formal standards of research management training and good practice of research management trainings. Mm-hmm. And we will fill this with a lot of examples, probably also examples from our pilot testers, so that we have really on-hands experience in there, people who actually doing this in the field for years and they have been successful with their trainings. And we want to include as many examples of these as possible as we can, mm-hmm. that are useful for others in the future. So that's also one approach. And I think what I want to emphasize very specifically here are two tools we have in the handbook, mm-hmm. that I think are one main cornerstones of the handbook. One of them is the program development guide, and the other one is the curricular component method process, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So these will be two tools that can be standalone, but also will be part of this handbook in the end. I can go into more detail what they are actually about. I think we can do that a little bit later, maybe.
Yeah, we have a section how to use it, but put a little bit more words on that structure.
Yeah, okay. So let's say the program development guide, the idea here is to have sort of checklist, mm-hmm. that you can use from program conception to program implementation and management, with all these steps in between. So there will be three major phases. That's program conception. Then we have the second phase, that's program planning. There's where also the curriculum development has its place. Mm-hmm. And then we have the program implementation and management. This will also include something like how to develop your program in the future. What can you do to make it even better? Like how can you use the experience of your participants to reflect on what you've been doing so far, and so on. And these development guide, because we know that all the training providers are in such different positions and they have to develop training for so different target groups, that we decided that these major three categories have several sub-steps. And in all of these sub-steps, we have, so to speak, guiding questions to reflect the process, so to speak. So what we want to achieve with this development guide is to help people reflect on their own training, conception, developing, and implementation process. Because we cannot know for everybody what they should be doing in their position, but we want to give them an idea what to think about and what could be important. But obviously, the training providers still have to decide for themselves if one of these steps is actually applicable to them. Mm. One of them would be, for example, to make it clear, an example, maybe one of them would be a business model. So you should think about the business model of your training in advance before planning it to see, is this training feasible for the long term? But if you're in a situation where, for example, your institution provides all the funds for your training and you don't need a business model because you will never be on the open market, then obviously this step is not for you. You don't have to think about a business model. It's already decided how it will work out. But for another training providers, maybe look completely different because they don't have funding and they have to actually get the participation fees to finance for their training. Mm-hmm. So they have to think about the idea of the business model a lot more. Yeah. So that's the basic idea we have with these guiding questions to reflect the own process of training development or program development.
Yeah. So on the one hand, there's the guiding questions. On the other hand, we are looking for good examples. Yeah. So that we can say, okay, this is the checklist. Here is what you have to do. And here is something that someone in Europe is doing, and that could serve as an interesting example, how to develop a business model or whatever. Yeah, so these are the two components, and also what is relevant is with the checklist, that could be something that that you are using when you develop a completely new program. Yeah, but it could also be used for the revision of an existing program. Yeah, so it could also help to improve what is already there. So there's a kind of double potential to use it.
So thanks. Now, next block, we move naturally into how to actually use the handbook. So, Niklas, do you wanna start folding out for us how you would actually use this as a training provider?
I would want to take this opportunity to talk about this curricular component process, or the curricular component method. This is something that is also tied to the checklist. This is something that takes place in the beginning of the not program concept phase, but program development phase. So the concept is already clear. You know what your target group is. You know how big the training is, the stakeholders, business model. All of these has been done. But then there's also the question about the content. And what we were referring to earlier was the learning outcomes, the competences. And the second tool, the curricular component process, that should help training providers to have an easier time to decide on the competences and learning outcomes they want to have in their training. And this also touches on the question that I think that's also something we should talk about, and that is how the RM competence framework that is now existing and is now adapted also by the European Commission, how this fits into our handbook as well. Because I think we need to talk about this to understand what the curricular component method actually is trying to achieve. And so what we did is that we created, we have two formal projects that are important here. So we have the RM Roadmap project, and they did a huge survey and asked a lot of research managers what their position is and what competence and skills they think are relevant for their position. And from all of these surveys, they created 12 areas of research management. And in these 12 areas, all of these areas have a list of skills and competences. And these lists don't have learning outcomes or different levels in them. They're just list of skills and competences. But what the RM competence framework provides from the Cadera project, they are also providing learning outcomes and different levels for the competences. And so we wanted to combine these two. That was our idea. How can we combine these two formal projects? And so what we did is we created a list of competences from the RM competence framework. So we mapped them onto the area, the skills and competences from the area, and try to match them as closely as possible, so that in the end, we have a list of competences for each area that are described in terms of the competence framework with 4 levels, learning outcomes for each level. And that was the main idea, to have these lists to create as a starting point. So sort of clustering of the RM competence framework is what we did there. The RM competence framework, I think, has over 800 learning outcomes, and I think if you want to develop a training, it could be, you could say it's quite difficult to get an overview of all of these learning outcomes. So our idea was, let's do some sort of clustering, and that was our first step. So we decided we need to cluster these competences and make them fit these areas. So we have smaller lists of competences, and while we were doing that, we realized that there's a huge overlap of competences between all these 12 lists. And so we decided we also need to create a list of competences that are relevant for every research manager out of these lists we already have.
When I was listening to Niklas, I realized, and I don't know what the people listening to us think. So you see how complex this is. Yeah. So we have areas of research management. We have competence lists. We have learning outcomes. In this RMComp, it's more than 800 learning outcomes. So that is an enormous complexity. And all these projects that have been working during the last years, they did a fantastic job. Yeah, because they brought all that stuff together. Yeah, and
complex,
but the question is, if you are sitting as a training provider, you are sitting in front of a list with 800 learning outcomes. Yeah, what are you doing with that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an easy job. And you see that what I think we should go into an example to even make that clearer. But what we try to do is we try to help people to navigate through all that. And I want to stress something that Niklas said. Niklas said, when we matched all that, we matched these areas with the competences and everything, and we identified a set of competencies relevant to all research managers. I think that's a real achievement. Yeah, because so far we have all these different areas where these people work in, but when we matched these different projects, we created that list, and maybe I mentioned some of them to illustrate what it is about. So competences that all research managers need are, for instance, cultural sensitivity, problem solving, strategic management, critical thinking, but also things like people management and managing teams and team performance. It's, of course, about project management. It's about diplomacy, negotiation, and mediation skills. It's about engagement with key stakeholders. It's about building and maintaining relationships with funders, partners. It's about legal skills. It's about AI, and so on. So it's but that's already a major part of this set of competences. Yeah. So that is already an achievement, because with that smaller list, we're not talking about 800 so anymore. We are talking about a small list, and we can already say every program should consider to take some of them on board. Yeah, that's already a nice achievement. And then we combine it with the more special ones. So it's really about navigating through this wilderness of competences and areas these people work in. And if we manage to do that with the handbook, then this fantastic work that our colleagues have done before will become applicable. And that's the achievement.
Yeah, maybe to add something, because some people might listen now and say, well, our research managers may not need one of these competences Frank just mentioned, even if we say they're relevant for all. And because obviously, even in this, there are so specific roles in research management sometimes that some people might never have to engage with stakeholders in their job as a research manager. That's absolutely possible. So even if we have this list, and I want to emphasize this here, this is just like as a baseline, as a guiding tool. So we don't want to say everybody needs to have this. And I think Frank put it nicely just now, but think about if these competences might be relevant for the target group you have. And I think that's the very important part. So, and that's also what we want to emphasize, to have this interoperability. So we don't want to say you absolutely need to have this, but we want to say, look at these lists, and as a training provider, decide for yourself, are these the ones that you find really relevant for your target group, or do you have to change something? So it's a starting point. It's not the finish line. I think that's what we have to say here. It's the starting point.
It's even not possible to take them all into a training, because that would be overwhelming for a single training course.
Is it going to be a virtual or interactive handbook?
I think what we have to do is we have to make it easily accessible. Yeah, and from the nature of our handbook, like Niklas was just arguing, it's a checklist. You have to decide what is relevant for me and so on. And then if that is the logic of the handbook, this more interactive thing is very close to this logic. Yeah, because then you go through the checklist, and if you say I need more about that, you click on the item and then you get some examples or so. So that would be the ideal construction. And there is already a website for the project. So that is something that is desirable but not finished yet, of course, because we are still currently we're working on the prototype of the handbook.
And this also comes with its own set of problems, so to speak, because I think it was also talked about that maybe the RM competence framework will be at some point even a living document. It will maybe change over time. Somebody also would need to put all of these changes that are happening to the RM competence framework back in the tool that we are providing. So that's also something where it's not 100% clear how we can provide something that still has these living document, still evolving type to it. So that's also to be seen how we can implement this, for example. But just to put it out there, it's always difficult to provide something in this form when the landscape is changing so much all the time.
Yeah.
And how important this living document is something you could easily imagine if you think about the influence of artificial intelligence for the job of a research manager. So it's already part of the handbook, but I could imagine that some of the competences that we currently believe to be important maybe are not important anymore in 3 or 4 or 5 years time. Because the working processes have been changed by artificial intelligence. So what we are providing now is a starting point for the handbook. But if it wants to have an impact in the long run, it definitely has to be a living document.
I'm talking about a living document. Is it possible as a stakeholder, not being part of the project, to give input or feedback on things how does that work?
I think for now, since we are still in the pilot testing phase, first of all, the pilot testers will get the version of the handbook and they will provide their feedback first.
Yeah.
And I think with the pilot testers, we already include a huge group of stakeholders from different institutions, different contexts, different countries. And I think in this process, there will at some point be also the possibility for other people to provide feedback. And obviously the training providers that are our pilot testers, they also interact with people and talk about the handbook. And so in this possible way there can also be influence on what we are doing in the handbook. And it is at the moment not planned to have it open for everybody to just contribute something so far, because we also have to manage the input we are getting for now from the pilot testers and our consortium and everybody that's involved in there, and also the advisory board of our consortium. And after we've included all of their feedback, I think then we are at the point in time where we have something that we can actually give people and say, this is something you can use now. And then I think we are still open to feedback and ideas regarding the handbook, but I think we have to get it to this point first, because before we can give it to other people, I think.
I think what we intend is a certain level of maturity of the handbook that will allow to incorporate more people into the discussion, and this level of maturity will be achieved with these pilot testers that are part of the project. But then, of course, we will also at a certain point we will go open with it, and we will not say, because that's also an implication of a living document. When we publish the first version, we will not say, look, this is the handbook and this is how it will be forever. but we of course have to incorporate the feedbacks and to develop things further. So that will definitely happen. There is an interesting structure from one of the previous projects that Niklas has already mentioned. This RM roadmap project used to have a structure of national ambassadors. So there were people in every European country who were at certain points of the project consulted to ask questions. What do you think about it? And that is also something we still can imagine, but we still have to work on the detailed plans, how to do that. But of course, people like these ambassadors would be good people to give us feedback on what we do at a certain stage of maturity.
I think maybe it's time to actually get back to the example for the listeners to maybe have to understand the curriculum component method a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think this would be my idea to get back to these example we started out with. So for this example, Niels, let's say you are a training provider now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Hit
you're
me.
here, you want to develop a training, and you have, but you've done something already. So you have already identified your target group, and you know that you want to have a few days of a training.
Mm-hmm.
So not just like 1 hour or one workshop, but a few days. That's the basics you have. That's clear. Okay, so you know that already, and now you identified your target group as the pre-award managers, because you realized there are just not enough people at your institution who can help with the proposal development process and everything that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's assume that's your goal for now.
Yep.
Okay, then you take our handbook and you look at these curriculum curricular component methods, and then you can see, okay, I identified the pre-award managers. So let's first look at the list of competences from the pre-award managers, and then you can take a look at this competence lists, and also maybe look at the competences relevant for all research managers. And I think if you do that, you have something around 20 competences to look at. So first, we are not going into the learning outcomes yet. First of all, we're just now looking at the competences. So that's the first step, looking at the competences. And now I think we have to specify the training a little bit more. So let's say you envision the topic of your training as something like strategic funding acquisition and proposal design.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you decided that's what's most important for the people I need to train.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you look at, then you see what competences of these lists would fit best for this kind of training. And I think you can now narrow it down even more. I think if you say you want to have a 2 to 3 days training, probably a list of 6 competences would be an idea, something, so that you have like 2 blocks on one, or 1 block per competence on one day. So let's start for now. Let's say we want to do 6. Mm-hmm. So you say pre-award is very important. That's something in the category of specialized knowledge in the RM competence framework. So you say that's definitely important. Then you say proposal development, proposal design, funding acquisition. There's always coming a lot of problems your way if you're doing that. So problem solving is the next one you think it's very important. And then probably something like creativity. That's from the list of relevant for everybody, I think. And something like decision making is also, I think, important. Strategic planning, and also engagement with key stakeholders, because for funding acquisition and proposal design, I think stakeholders are a must. Mm-hmm. And now you have a list of learning outcomes, 6 competences for the second level. I think it's 4 or 5 per competence. So now you look at something like 25, 26 learning outcomes. And then you can, from these 26 learning outcomes, you can start to select the ones you do think are most important and that you really want to achieve. This makes a way smaller list now you have to look at a training provider. So, and from this list of learning outcomes, it's easier to jump to the next step. That would be the selection of topics, what you actually want to achieve. And let us make, one example of a learning outcome. Learning outcome would be, for example, for pre-award, one of the learning outcomes on the second level would be has in-depth knowledge of the grant application, can advise on its own, or knows who should be contacted for specific expertise. Mm-hmm. So let's say that's something you want to achieve. And then you could call the topic something like grant application expertise. This is one block of your training now. And you say this has to include grant application logic from call to proposal strategy. And for example, something like how can experts be involved? So with this, you have a baseline. You have something you can say to the people. You can say, I need a trainer who can do this for my target group. This is the person I need. So I think this is the idea of this process, so that you have an option as a training provider to narrow down these areas, narrow down the competences for your training, decide on the learning outcomes, and then look for trainers who can do what you want what you have in mind for your training, for your participants. So this is, I think, how this process should work.
Okay. Thanks. Let's just move forward here to the final block before the reflections. The added value. I think in between the lines, everything we've been talking about here, it's sort of obvious, right? But if we put a little bit more words on it.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, indeed, maybe everything we already discussed pointed at this issue of added value. I think there is an added value of like Niklas was explaining, of putting loose ends together. Yeah, so in this development of research management on the European level, we have all these studies with all these outcomes and all these loose ends, and so we try to create something that puts that together, and we try, of course, we also try to serve the careers of research managers with that. Yeah, so the immediate goal, like we now explained several times, is to have something for training providers, but the training providers are doing it for those people who are on a career track and want to develop themselves. And in our ideal world, yeah, this whole competence-oriented thinking leads to a situation where to a job we have certain competences related. A person already has acquired certain competences. We look for the match or mismatch, and the training will close the gap. Yeah, so that is the understanding.
Exactly.
And maybe one more point is, if this all works with the handbook, there is even a starting point for more actions and activities.
And maybe to add to that, also something that hopefully will happen in the future is for research managers to be able to create their own career path with these competence and learning outcome oriented world. This would also mean that if you include also some things like self-assessment tools or something for research managers, this would also mean that they could create their own career paths out of this. So if trainings use this as a standardization, if a self-assessment uses this kind of standardization, we get to a point where it's possible that you craft your own career path as a research manager. And I think, obviously, this is a dream that might be a few years away, but hopefully we will get to this point in the future. And I think our handbook is one of the steps in this direction.
And that would deliver a major contribution to build the European research area. Yeah, because that is the ultimate purpose, of course, behind all these activities. And research managers are part of that story, and that will be able to bring Europe also closer together in that respect.
Let these be the final words here, because it's an absolutely fine perspective what we've been talking about, and reflections on the importance of what you do. Thank you so much. So, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to the end of this. And I can tell you that I am getting actually get comments and feedback from people that actually like to listen to this series. I'm happy to hear that as a podcast producer, that the content is something that is appreciated out there. So thanks for listening out there. If you do like what I'm doing here, go and check there will be a website for this specific episode. You have a link in where you listen to your podcast. If you go to the episode resume, there's a link. And on this page, you will of course have links to these two gentlemen's LinkedIn sites and to the RM Framework website, where you can explore more the project. Connect also on the RM Framework LinkedIn site. I will put a link to that as well. So if you're interested in the project, you will get it in your LinkedIn feed. Connect with me also if you're interested in what I do. So yeah, that's that. Thanks for joining me. It's been a very nice conversation.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye. Thank you for listening.
You have been listening to the Grant Collaborations, a part of the Grant podcast. This podcast episode is a collaboration between the RM Framework project and the Grant. All episodes in this RM Framework series have their own site on the Grant website. You will find the link in the episode site where you listen to your podcast. On the site for this episode, you'll find a link to Frank and Niklas' LinkedIn sites, and of course a link to the project website. Next episode will be released on the 29th of January next year, and will present the pilot testing process and its significance within the project. We look forward to that. You have been listening to the Grand Collaborations, a part of the Grand Podcast.